Reshaping Educational Futures, Safeguarding Student Data in the EdTech for National Development. A very pressing discussion, a very pressing topic that requires definitely a lot of expertise. And for that, we have a panel of specialists from the law side, from technology side. May we please have Ms. Abha Maheshwari, the CEO for Allen Digital, please. Please give us... Thank you. Mr. Madhur Singhal, the Managing Partner and CEO for Praxis Global Alliance. A very warm welcome, sir. Mr. Vishal Makhija, the India EdTech Lead for Amazon Web Services. Welcome, sir. Mr. Ankur Dhawan, the President, Product and Technology for Upgrad. Welcome, Ankur. And the moderator for the session is Ms. Srinidhi Srinivasan, who's the partner at Ikigai Law. Welcome, ma'am. We'll keep on pushing people from outside and also have Madam Srinidhi begin the session, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I think through the course of the day, we've spoken a lot about opportunities and the tremendous potential for growth in this space. A key driver for that growth is data and innovative technologies, and where there's data, especially where there's student data, which can also be sensitive, there are risks. And so there's very much an onus on organizations to make sure that that data is kept secure and protected. Now, there's also a new data protection law, which some of you may have heard about. This was enacted last year. We're waiting for it to be implemented. What this law calls for is really a rethink in the way that organizations, all kinds of organizations, businesses think about individuals' data. There are do's and don'ts set out in the law on how you really collect and use data. There are concepts like informed consent. There are concepts around how do you engage service providers, how do you really protect data, what are kind of organizational hygiene measures that you have to build in. And the interesting thing about this law is that it's principle based, which is that it leaves it really to organizations to decide how it applies to specific products and business models. That's great for lawyers like me, but I know it can be very challenging for businesses to figure out exactly what the yardstick is and what needs to be done. I know this is a slightly technical subject, but we'll try and keep it conversational and engaging. And I'm very glad to have a great panel with me to discuss this theme. And I think we'll jump right in. Maybe Abha, if I could come to you. Essentially, so this law was enacted last year. It like I said, it governs everything that one does with individuals' data, and sets out certain do's and don'ts around it. But before we even come to thoughts on the law, I think one theme I'd love to hear from you is just what kind of transformation are we seeing with using students' data and using data in enhancing outcomes? Allen's, of course, an established player in the education space, and with digital, there's an increasing foray into personalized learning outcomes and use of data in tech. So, I mean, what kind of data use does this involve?
Thank you, Srinidhi. So, before we get into this discussion, right, for those of you who don't know Allen, right, we are India's leading test prep company, and we have a 35-year legacy of academic excellence, right? And which means that over the 35 years, we have really understood what it takes to help students, particularly in the field of STEM, and master those subjects. Now, if you start to sort of layer technology over it, what is a very interesting proposition here is you can now take all of this learning and with technology actually get into a place where you can start to deliver personalized learning for students. We've throughout the day we've been talking about personalized learning. Now when you start to sort of break it down and how data is at the heart of any personalization that you'll be able to do, right? So I'll take a simple example. So one of the things that we are trying to do at Allen is to be able to do precise diagnostics for students. Abha as a student tried some test or some homework and she got some question wrong. it's really meaningful to figure out why did Abha get that question wrong. Did she make a mistake in just applying a formula, or is there an underlying misunderstanding of some concept? How do you get to that, right? The way you sort of start building it out is you take all the different, like you can start imagining a graph with like many millions of nodes, and the nodes of the graph is as deep as you can get with with the content that you have, right? The subjects, the concepts, the chapters, the topics, right? And that is when you are able to tell Abha that okay, she was attempting a question on on say physics, but the underlying concept that she was weak in was perhaps calculus, because it was a prerequisite for the question that she was attempting. So the point I'm trying to make is this really beautiful world of getting to a personalized learning for a student, where the student actually feels like there is a one-on-one learning that's happening with a teacher. It can only be achieved if you can truly harness the power of data and be able to map content and how a student is actually engaging with that content to make the right choices for the student. Some of the features that like we are building, which really leverage how students are engaging with with our data, whether it's homework or whether it's lectures or whether it's tests. I'll give an example, right? One of the features that students love a lot is when they are engaging with some of these tests and practice that we give, they make mistakes along the way and they have doubts along the way. We curate all of that in what we call an improvement book. So not only is it a great place for all the mistakes that I have that I could have done, as Nitin spoke about it earlier, also I could have done it 2 years ago for for that matter, but now I can start to see where these mistakes are, what are the patterns that like Abha seems to be making regular mistakes in thermodynamics. Can I start to personalize the practice that I give to Abha, right? So that's one of the features that we are building. I'll also talk about, I mean, we're talking a lot about like academic excellence and learning outcomes in academics, but mental well-being is also very, very meaningful, right? And now you can start to see how Abha is behaving and then be able to interject with perhaps more mindfulness if there's a need, or meditation if that's a need. And in fact, in many cases, it can also be that this particular student actually needs counseling, or needs to be able to engage with an external counselor because there is an issue with mental health and mental well-being. So the point is that like data is at the heart of really actually personalizing the learning experience for a student, and I think that is where many aspects of this the law actually become very meaningful, and I know we'll talk about that.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much, Abha. Like you said, I think data is at the heart of personalized learning. Ankur, if I could pose actually a very similar question to you on Abha spoke about, precise diagnostics for a child. There's also using that data then to enhance outcomes for the entire cohort.
Yeah.
And I think no panel these days is complete without a reference to Gen AI. So if I could also ask you generally about, the use of AI technologies and underlying data, what kind of trends are we seeing ahead?
Yeah, sure. I think Abha talked from the perspective of K-12 segment or test prep segment. When I look at higher education, I think one of the things which I believe is very different is that many times we are asked to collect data by the university partners as well, and that is very sensitive data. Not only university partners, if I go beyond, one of the key role which we play in upskilling is to help the learner who has come to us find a relevant job which he is looking for. That means I need to also capture data on how he's performing on the various assessments, how sincere is he in studying, how well he is in his language, and that data we have to give to sometimes recruiters to finalize and shortlist the candidate when they are looking to hire someone in the organization. Now, the whole data which we are collecting obviously is through consent, but if this data is leaked or we lose it because of some mistake at our end, that's a big problem, because the student has not given us the data for the purpose of anything other than finding him a job and getting him upskilled. Major role, as Abha mentioned, and I think that is the biggest difference. In an offline classroom, the data is there. I'm sure the teacher who teaches actually knows a lot about the student. It's a personal data collection which he is doing, or when he's teaching a student. Whereas what we do in EdTech is that we collect data on every second basis, what the student is doing, where is he getting stuck, which part of the course is revising, which assessment, as Abha pointed out, which particular question he or she got wrong. Now, all that data is collected for one particular purpose. As I mentioned in the beginning, our job is to keep him motivated to complete his course and ensure that he achieves the outcome, which in our case most of the time is getting a good job or promotion or particular skill which he wants to acquire for showcasing himself in his society. That has to be done. So that's why I think this law is very important. I'm sure we always had that in mind while we were creating our product and CX systems, that we have a big responsibility of collecting and ensuring this data is safe. But now with the law coming, I think the culture also has to be deeply ingrained in everybody, that data, whatever we collect, is sacrosanct. And Gen AI, as she just asked the question, I think Gen AI gives us a lot of possibilities in terms of improving the learning outcome. So till this now, if someone has a question, has a doubt, the only way was that we will collect the doubt and we'll connect him with one of the TA who will come and answer that question. Over time, you will just create bucketing of doubts and then say, okay, you can go to FAQs or you can quickly go through the video and get your doubt resolved. But with Gen AI, we have a very personalized way of solving the same doubt. The person has 24/7 a doubt resolution bot agent whom they can reach out, ask questions, get their questions answered, and go step by step rather than just getting either an answer straightforward, this is the answer to the question, but it goes beyond. It can actually make him learn through right questions and through right hints. So Gen AI is a big power. Specifically the LLMs which are getting every day. I in the morning itself, mail came that the ChatGPT 4.0 mini will be available and it will be much cheaper. So LLMs are trying to be cheaper, and Vishal will be sitting here saying, why I'm talking, but whatever. So point is that because this is such a powerful tool, you cannot ignore. If this tool can help my student complete his course, I have to leverage it. At the same time, I have a responsibility of not misusing the tool in which can hurt him in any way. So that's about the digital data protection for us.
Great. Yeah, I think it's all about finding that balance. And yeah, Vishal, if I could bring you in, I think both Abha and Ankur spoke about the opportunities with technology in this space. Ankur spoke about Gen AI and LLMs, which by definition consume huge volumes of data. So if you could also speak about some of those trends and also the risks, and how do you see a data protection law actually coming in and helping address some of those risks?
Yeah, I think, I've always said that we tend to always overestimate technology in the short run and underestimate in the long run. I think Gen AI is such a new technology right now that we still need to see the impact of Gen AI, right? But having said that, the good part is already global policy makers and business bodies already talking about responsible AI and talking about how do they adhere to global frameworks like GDPR and including the upcoming data protection law that is there. And one of the main guardrails of responsible AI is ensuring data privacy and security. And how do we really ensure data privacy and security? I'm sure everyone in this room has sometime or the other used some LLM model like an OpenAI or a Claude or a Meta AI for that matter, right? Somebody's used it for that. So think about the fact that if you used as a free user, if you use that data, that model can be trained. I think Abha mentioned, Ankur mentioned that for them, they take data from the users out of consent and that's their IP. So as a business owner, how do I ensure that I take these base LLM models, I use my own company data to train these base LLM models, and then provide personalized learning outcomes. Abha, you talked about prescribed diagnostics. The only way you can do that in a larger scale is leverage Gen AI, but leverage your own data set, right? Similarly with upgrad too, right? Take the data consent and leverage your own this thing, and then keep fine-tuning that as the base model increases out. And at the core of that is you have to ensure that the model doesn't learn from your data. I think that's where it is, and I think that's where Amazon comes in, where we provide these tools, that we provide these resources via Bedrock and via various services. But coming back from a law standpoint, I think the good part is I think no law, including GDPR, has really covered responsibility AI, because I think GDPR came up in 2018 from an enforceable standpoint. So these laws need to start taking into account newer frameworks, newer technologies as soon as they come. I think, as I said, I think AI is going to be the buzzword for yesterday, today, and tomorrow for some time. But yeah, it'll be on a wait and watch mode to see how are we able to do this. For now, we are working with companies and businesses all over to ensure that your data is still your ID, your IP. You are the custodian, and the models don't learn from your data.
Great, yeah, and that also kind of speaks to your unique position as a data processor in data protection laws, and maybe we can speak a little bit more about that in the course of this conversation. Yeah, I'd also like to bring Madhur in. Madhur, this law was enacted last year after many years of being in the work. So I'm just curious to know if you've actually seen a shift in the way education businesses have perceived data. Like Ankur said, it's actually not just also about the law; it's so much more than that. It's about trust. So yeah, I would love to get your thoughts.
No, I think the law has, I would say the education sector is actually trailing the law in this case. The law has actually been proactive. I think a lot of the education sector was using customer data more for marketing and cross-selling and those kind of use cases, little bit for improved learning. But, at least I am not aware of anybody using that data to, let's say, give to a potential recruiter and know how the learning journey was, right, of a candidate, because that's actually also useful information, right? You might actually not even need to do an interview if you knew what kind of mistake. Is this person a good learner or not, for example, right? But nobody is and nobody was doing it. And so the law is, I think, very timely. Now, the law, I think, the question is, now that there is a law, right, what is the right boundary of that law, right? Now, one is, a recruiter comes and say, hey, tell me more about this learner. Now, is that kosher or is this not? Probably not, because this is personally identifiable. And I, as an individual, consent that my record or my marks or score or certificate is shared, but not my journey, right? So there is one part. Now, let's take it one step more confusing, treat for lawyers. Right? To say, okay, I'm not going to share your journey. I'm going to share your third quartile on learning effectiveness, right? Versus the cohorts, right? You are relatively better off, not better off. Now, do I share this information? I might not be very comfortable with that. Now, take it one step further. Amazon says, I have requirement for 100 SDs of grad. Give me your best 100 guys, right? Now, if you truly leverage data, you know who the best 100 guys are. And it's not just reflected from the score or the certificate. It is reflected from the journey. It is reflected from timely attendance. It's reflected from how many times rerolls happened on a certain video. It is reflected on how quickly assessments were finished, right? So I think the whole Data Protection Act has definitely brought data in spotlight much more than protection and privacy in spotlight. At least that's what I have seen in education. And so the law is very timely. I've definitely seen edtech providers thinking about data a bit more holistically now. But I think that trend has been catalyzed and accelerated because of AI technology having evolved, not because or despite of the Data Protection Act.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because we're actually still waiting for the law to be implemented, we're waiting for rules, we're waiting for guidance, we're waiting for market practice to evolve around this. But Abha, if I could actually bring you in on now, let's talk about the law. It says a few things. It has these principles like informed consent, organizational best, hygiene, organizational technical measures. But particularly for children, there are also a few additional asks around getting parents' consent, verifiable consent. There are certain restrictions around tracking, behavioral monitoring. So curious to know how something like this is going to impact edtech platforms.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, I will reiterate what Madhur said, right? It is a very welcome framework, right? Increasingly, as a country, we are getting more and more digitized. It is the right time to really have a framework which outlines the rights of individuals to their own personal data, and it also starts to outline the rules by which organizations should actually handle this data. So first, I think it's a very, very welcome framework. Now, I think the other piece also, which in the way the rules are, in the way the law is written today, it also recognizes that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Because there are specifically in the law, like the government can actually exempt certain industries, institutions from the law. Now I'll take EdTech, and particularly, in the space that I play in, I'll take that as an example, right? There are two particular aspects of the law. One is you need for children, you need a verifiable parental consent, and then the second big one is that consent or no consent, you cannot be behaviorally monitoring children. Now, I think when I start to overlay that on education and the ability to really provide personalized learning, I definitely see that as a challenge, right? And so I think the way I see it is, the government now actually has the power and the onus also to figure out which are these institutions which are sort of providing safe spaces. Because the more and more that I think about like why these are probably written, there are social media companies where there is a lot of behavioral monitoring and tracking, largely with the intent of engagement and with with the idea of being able to monetize that through advertising, right? And but if you are actually using this data to provide better academic outcomes, then I think that should sort of fit in safe spaces. So I think that's the place we are in. But clearly we are dealing with academic data of students, and many of our students are actually under 18, right? So those are rules that become meaningful for us to navigate and really see how we are actually classified as a safe space.
Great. Yeah, I think when we speak about it being a principle-based law, there's also, of course, a lot of beneficial use cases, beneficial tracking. So perhaps also identifying then what are those spaces and activities, like you said, so that, I mean, eventually I think the law also says when it speaks about children that it's the best interest of child. So eventually kind of falling back to that benchmark.
Yeah.
So great. Ankur, actually, if I could bring you in on just from a product lens, what is it that a business can do to now comply with the law? I think we have some idea about consent, but what does that actually mean for a product or in a workflow and within the organization?
So it means that every time we create a feature or we create a new screen or whatever we are thinking about, we need to first discuss, is this data required for the user of this particular report or particular feature internally? Because the whole operations team is accessing the data on a day-on-day basis. If I keep giving everybody all the data, then I don't know how do I control if this data is getting leaked or not. So first thing we decide for every time that is this field, is this email, is this specifically personally identifiable data, is this required or not? And that is the principle of data minimization as well. Decide what is most important for you to keep, because of which your operations will not work, or because of which your feature will not work, or because of which you are not able to deliver. Specifically, if it is identifiable to a learner. And then that is the whole thought process then goes in. Wherever possible, if you are in doubt, let's take a consent again. If you think that there's, the example I'm taking just now, Madhur pointed out, if I create a behavioral score, which Abha also pointed out, I need to take a consent again. Are you okay to let recruiters see that score for you? Some people who are good, they will give consent, and some may not give. So accordingly, we'll have to decide. Wherever we are in doubt as a product and tech team, we need to give it to the user to decide. Also, in addition to that, we need to see how are we making it visible for him to come back and get the data deleted or get the data modified or decide that, okay, they want consent back. So the whole thought process around product tech goes with this Data Protection Act and then say, okay, what am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do? Rather than just earlier it used to be anybody deciding whatever they can do because data is with them. They can do all pivoting, they can do all kind of cuts, and they can use it for internal purpose or external purpose as well. Many times reports are written based on the data points without taking any concern. So product and tech now, when they start thinking, they have to start thinking what data is allowed.
Absolutely. I think you hit a lot of key themes within the law: minimization of data, identifying boundaries. When in doubt, go back to the user. I think the user is kind of placed at the center of this legislation. And Vishal, because at Amazon, you've kind of gone through this learning curve before with GDPR, with CCPA. There are 100 privacy laws around the world. So I'm sure there must be many learnings from that journey. So would love to hear your thoughts on takeaways from there.
And in fact, we have this great saying within Amazon that every problem that's we are facing has been solved by some team somewhere globally. We're like almost 1.5 million people, with don't know how many businesses myself right now, right? But coming to this standpoint itself, I think more and more we've seen, GDPR is a gold standard for all data regulations. And to think about it, we going back to the first maxim I was telling you, it's not even 6 years old since it's enforceable. So have customers, what are the learnings from a NetTech standpoint? We've had customers who face the brunt of, regulations because there's been massive data breaches, primarily because of just simple things like data encryption not existing, right? And I think I remember one such, US-based EdTech. I think it was called Edmomo, right? And it was one of those open source learning platforms. You see the data, it shut shop. So I can talk about it now, but it had a massive data breach. And what's one of the biggest aspects when a data breach happens is that, as Ankur mentioned, you have to take consent every time, data is, captured out. But when a breach happens, you're losing consent or you're losing trust from the parents, from the students, and the entire ecosystem for that matter. When 77 million records got breached out, the entire business was lost primarily because students stopped enrolling their platform. And on top of that, regulation happened. And as a result, they shut shop. It all started with one major data breach. And it was as easy as just ensuring data encryption both in transit and in rest. It's something which we help our customers irrespective. So I think the major learning is, and I'm so glad that if you see within this panel, there's not a single CISO, right? Security is not a CISO responsibility. It's an organization responsibility. And I think more and more, at least I've seen that working with Indian EdTechs here, that is the DNA of a lot of companies where we are saying, okay, security won't be one person's responsibility, it'll be the entire organization's responsibility, and it's happening. So I think that's a learning which we need to implement and continue with it.
Great. I think that organizational ethos, all it takes is one breach. So just preparing the entire ecosystem within the organization for that. And one, example that I've often used is if you've left banana peels on the floor, then no regulator is going to say that, well, we won't award you a penalty, a hefty fine. So Madhur, if I could actually bring you in there on, we've heard from a product lens as well. We've heard from Abha as well on what might be tricky aspects of compliance. So just from you as well, what do you think would be the most challenging parts of compliance for this space?
Yeah, I think purely from a commercial angle, not a legal angle, I think when the compliance per se is never bad, it becomes bad when it becomes onerous to comply, right? Which means documentation, reportings, government departments now needing information or tracking or audit trails, which are just very difficult to maintain, which necessitate use of technology because you can't maintain audit trail. Inconsistencies if you're an omni-channel business like Abha's business, right? Perhaps same customer, unique ID, being able to take a single view of the customer's journey, application, information collected here versus this, right, across channels, right? So I think if the compliance till it's a law, by principle, it's okay. But if it translates into 10 reportings to comply to the law or prove again and again that you are in compliance, then it's a problem. The second thing is control, right? The law tells what is to be done, but the boundary of this law is what I would say is ethical conduct, right? Because otherwise the law is boundaryless. In principle, yes, we can be super conservative, not collect any information and have a really sort of uncompetitive business. But, you as a business then demonstrate consent, parental consent, right to delete, right to know, or, making it very visible in the product what all is being shared by whom. Now you can choose to use that data and share some of it in aggregate. So you are very well within the principles of the law whenever it happens. But, how do you draw the boundary of ethical conduct, and how do you give control to the owner of the data, right, on use of the data, right? And which is why, in fact, this law came from the digital advertising world to start with, because that's where the data was perhaps being compromised almost mindlessly, right? With no self-regulation or boundaries of ethical conduct. I think the third thing is about discrimination, right? The way I look at it from a business perspective, you use this data, but then do you do platforms or businesses become unfair because certain access to certain kind of recruiters are being given, certain kinds of privileged access is being. Now you could say, hey, I go to a coaching class, and that coaching class gives me a scholarship because I was among the top 10 on that exam. That is also a kind of discrimination, or at least an incentive, but we are okay with that. In the digital world, you could still discriminate quite a bit. Right? You could discriminate on the opportunity or the platform itself by not showing your profile to a recruiter, right? And so on. So, I think the commercial boundaries have to be defined, right? And the individual businesses will have the onus to use the law to their advantage rather than disadvantage, and say, look, we are very compliant, and we actually like this because this is truly helping us conduct our business more ethically and transparently. But yes, if compliance documentation becomes onerous, if there are 10 government departments which need 10 different filings, if there are 20 different trainings now that are mandated to every single trainer who comes on the platform, then yeah, all of that starts to increase cost and time, and businesses don't like that.
Absolutely. I think everything that you said, Madhur. So there's documentation, which means there's legal involved. There's product, which means there are product books involved. There are business commercial decisions involved in this. There is because employees are handling that data. There's HR involved. So essentially all different teams within an organization are involved. But how does one actually go about then bringing them all together and kind of creating that culture or ethos of privacy? And Abha, would love to actually hear from you, especially because you're also straddling these two worlds where there's also the offline, so you're omni-channel as well, so would love to hear.
Yeah, see, I think, to me, like the biggest task right now is first like just driving cultural awareness of why like this is important, and because I just think as a nation, I feel like that hasn't been a priority. Like as a nation, we don't take privacy that seriously, especially if you compare, like on the other spectrum, if you compare a country like US, right? There where like privacy rules are so evolved. So that's why I said this is a very welcome step, but we are also at that at that level 0 right now. So when I start to map it to an organization, right, I think the big task, especially as at where I am, we are straddling an omni-channel world, and so we actually also have an offline world where a student is also like filling their information on a paper form, and then there's somebody who's entering that that data into the system. And so we are actually going through this whole exercise of, first of all, like what are all the touch points and where can we start bringing in the right processes to in fact make it more privacy safe, right? Like how do I bring in how do I minimize the touch points almost, right? Do I actually need a human filling the form, or do I actually give an online interface to even a parent that's coming into an offline center to fill it? So I think for and then of course there's the digital side of the world also, where there are, in some sense, I think maybe there's a little more sensitization already, but then the chances of also breaching or doing wrong things are just by access of access of such organized data, you actually have chances of breaching there also higher. So at least right now where we are, like till the very specific rules come out, what we are doing right now is really driving a lot of cultural sensitivity. We are also looking at all of our data touch points. Actually, Ankur talked about it. We are thinking a lot about data minimization. Like, do I need this 15 fields? Like, do I need all this information? So those are the kinds of things we are handling right now, while we are also starting to to also just look at what types of products we will need to build. For example, in terms of like consent, in terms of if there's there are very specific items there, right? In terms of a data breach, how do you inform? So I think we are looking at all of that, but I think to me the big aspect of what we need to do right now is first drive sensitivity, so that things like sharing information on WhatsApp, like it's at that basic level right now where we are spending a lot of our time.
And just picking up from that theme, I'm just curious to know, actually, question to Ankur and maybe anyone else who might want to come in. Who really is the privacy champion, or who should be the champion in the organization? I always get different responses here, so would love to hear from you.
Yeah. So in our case, it's of a chief information technology officer. We have appointed him because he's responsible for all the servers and whatever deployment we are doing. So he also has a unbiased view of what tech and product are doing. So he can ask a question in terms of why we have this data captured, or why we have this process of deleting data so cumbersome. So it's always better to have a third party rather than having us as a data champion. What we have done is that as a senior person who is at a CXO level, who is responsible for ensuring that security tests are done properly. So every year we have a VAPT, detailed VAPT to figure out. He has signed up the hackers to come and keep hacking our system on a regular basis and give us the input. So all that processes so that the external world also can let us know if there is something wrong going on in our company, is what we have done.
Would anyone else
Before, I think it shouldn't ever be a CISO's job. It should just, the CISO probably should report to the CEO for that matter. It's a shared responsibility across the organization.
And just Vishal, maybe if you'd also like to speak about what can data processors, I think you mentioned a little bit of this earlier in your responses also, but because you're sort of one step removed from the end users of a lot of the edtech businesses, is there something you can do to kind of aid them also to comply?
Yeah, I think we can and we do for that matter, right? I think of it as an analogy of building a house, right? I think when you're building a house, the homeowner is the owner, and I think businesses are going to be custodians of data or the owners of data by themselves. But when you're building a house, you require an architect and an interior designer. So in that level, and probably let me break it down into 4 or 5 different levels, right? And bear with me on this. So you have the foundation layer, right? I think that's what we as Amazon provide, the infra layer where we provide network, security, database, or secure for that matter. Once the foundation layer is good, you need locks and keys to ensure that there's no intrusion that's happening across. I think that's where, again, Amazon provides these tools like data encryption in transit and in rest to ensure your data is always protected. I think once that part is done, you need to ensure your house is complying to all the bylaws that exist, right? Municipal bodies, local bodies. I think that's where the frameworks come into matter. We actually work with companies to ensure they're GDPR compliant, FTC compliant, and of course, when this new law comes into attraction, ensuring we enact in that part too. You will never going to prevent phishing attacks on your data, right? Just the way people are going to try and bring you home, phishing attacks going to continue happening. And again, we ensure that we provide you the right monitoring tools that if and when that happens, you're able to remediate that very quickly. And I think lastly, I think as Abha mentioned, I think even Ankur mentioned this out, data is their IP. And every house requires a customized room. So we work with customers to ensure that your custom data is trained to base models like an AI for that matter, which in turn can lead to personalized learning and student outcomes. So we've tried to cover the entire gamut of services out there.
Great, thank you so much, Vishal, for those thoughts. Maybe if we could maybe dig into one of the aspects of the law that Abha has also spoken about, and Madhur, maybe there's a question to you on. So there's this concept of verifiable parental consent. How do you actually see this play out? Because while we're still waiting for rules to tell us some details, and just for the room, the idea is that if an organization is processing a child's data, they have to stop and say, child being anyone below the age of 18, they have to stop and say, hang on, please go get your parents' consent for this, and the yardstick is verifiable. So any thoughts on what this might be?
Yeah, no, this is an interesting question, at least connected to the previous question. I think the technology is there. It's not, this is going to be solved through technology. Verification, trying to get verification, but then you have to verify whether the verification was correct, right? It's like, you got your report card to be signed, but you could get a sign, but then is the sign genuine? Very difficult. But technology exists. Blockchain, for example, does exactly this. In fact, you could do automatic pre-verification to say, okay, a certain data has been given, a certain document has been given. All it needs is a block in the chain, which is exactly what blockchain is. And you could do automatic verification, almost like when you place an order on an e-commerce site. The entire thing, the card is stored, CVV is stored. Now it just OTP comes. Now you don't even need to do that. You have to press approve. Now not even approve, in 5 seconds it's auto approved. So you need to make this almost a seamless process so that 90% of the transactions are seamless. If you realistically, if I want verifiable consent, actually it's very difficult to operationalize. How do you get verifiable consent? Who will verify the verifier? And then who will verify both verifiers? And what about, separated parents? Like it's so complex, right? So technology has to come and solve it. Technology exists, but the implementation of the technology does not, right? And so just like we have UPI, which has created the right pipes for these different merchants or billers and consumers to now transfer money to each other in a completely verified way within the the RBI rules in that case, and the NPCI protocols in that case. We have to practically get this done. Now today, with the VID, a lot of Aadhaar authentications, I'm pretty sure everybody in the room has done some Aadhaar authentication for something, right? Maybe something like that happens. Aadhaar already provides for educational documents. Maybe, if my son or daughter is applying to universities, can I place that on my DigiLocker saying, okay, auto verify, right? For the next 3 months, I have consented, this XYZ to go ahead and, make applications, right? You can do it through Aadhaar or child Aadhaar or whatever. So I think technology exists, but the process around it does not exist. And so that will need to happen. And there are enough technologies that are available for it. The applications need to be built.
Fair. And I think, just when we envision the scale at which something like this needs to happen, and also, I guess, establishing while through OTP and other means, you may be able to establish that it's an adult, but the parent-child relationship...
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's why, see, the thing is, why UPI worked, see, you need, for any system to work, there is a fidelity framework in that system, right? Like, you make UPI payments because the fidelity is established. The merchant fidelity, the user fidelity, the protocol, the bank account, you're actually digging into the bank account of the user, but it is highly trustable today, right? Because there is a fidelity layer that is riding on top of the transaction. So you need to bring in fidelity. The problem is, and that's why I feel like implementation of this is easier said than done, because we don't have an NPCI equivalent on education. But actually speaking, education, scaling, my certificates, my marks, my grades, in fact, globally also, organizations like Prometric or the guys who do global assessments for GMAT, SAT, TOEFL exams, they actually they're still very rudimentary. You give an exam, you have a score. I have to say, send my score to XYZ university, right? And that's it. Like, that's really it's not V1.0, it's V0.1, right? But the V1.0, there is no global or national protocol. And unfortunately, there's not even an owner who can, take this. NPCI really put this fidelity, layer on top of the entire thing. So I'm hoping that will happen. Ministry of Education, organizations like FICCI who sort of drive this, right? Maybe that's one of the agendas that this committee that we formed on new education. It's an interesting point to take, because somebody have to own this.
Great. If I could just, I am also mindful of the time. So if I could get, quick thoughts from each of the speakers on just your thoughts on what you expect from the legal framework. There's a long way to go because there are rules awaited. There is a data protection board that will be established. There'll be, we see this as a long haul, but what are sort of our expectations from the government, from the DPB, from the ecosystem as it evolves? Maybe Ankur, if you could go first, and then
So I think identifying education as a different sector compared to many other sectors where the data will be collected, and understanding the goal of what data we are collecting and how it is helping our users, who is actually the student or learner, is important. Because if we create the same policy which is going to be applicable across industries, so one example I think Abha touched on, that maybe the policy, the data privacy comes from the angle of social media and how it actually impacts a young learner or user who is always on Facebook or Insta versus someone who is on our app to study, has to be clearly identified. We are also going to, if I can use the word addiction, which I don't want to, but still say if somebody gets addicted to learning, I think that's the best thing to happen. So the goal is to make him feel the learning pleasurable and not onerous is what the task education industry has, whether it's edtech or whether it's an offline education industry, whatever education institutions. So we want that to be recognized in the law and not create a law which is applicable in the same way across industries. That's what I will expect.
I think Ankur covered a lot of points I would make. I think the important thing, like I also alluded to earlier, that instead of, you can't kind of have a blanket law across all institutions, and the important step now is to identify which of these institutions or which of these verticals are actually focused on providing safe spaces, right? This is not to say that okay, we should be exempt from all things around this, right? I think the conversation then becomes into also what Ankur said, that I will also have certain responsibilities, and so the conversation needs to pivot to that. That if edtech is actually leveraging data and leveraging student data, which is largely to provide some academic learning outcomes, that's great. Sure, this qualifies as a safe space, but then what else is expected out of me? For example, like, yeah, you're not selling data to third parties, you're not advertising to kids. So there are definitely guardrails and boundaries that should apply to everyone, but I do think there's a conversation that needs to happen on not actually having a blanket requirement.
And I think we are already involved in some way, right? I think even when the NEP 2020 came out, I think all of us and all industry bodies' perspectives were taken into account. I think maybe just addition to what Abha and Ankur already said, keep the framework flexible, right? I think technology changes quite significantly, data requirements change quite easily. So just keep the framework flexible. Like today, whatever said and done, we keep talking about GDPR. Even they don't talk about AI yet. Right? It's been around for like almost about 3 years now. So as long as you keep the framework flexible, I think that's maybe a plus one as a data processor standpoint.
I would just make one very simple point. I think whatever the law be, I think it needs to have enough sandboxes that the law is tested, the implementations are done, it is proven right, because all the laws state it is for the student, but after they are implemented, they have huge potential to harm the student and harm the student's interests. Right, so the right sandboxing is very, very important. Like what we are seeing with the digital health mission, like UPI was not launched at the first prototype, right? It was tested, hundreds and thousands of transactions happened with different banks, with different NBFCs. We cannot, we're dealing with something very sensitive and which is time critically sensitive, because a student's age is a perishable product. It's not just a failed transaction, you will actually dent somebody's career. And so whatever is done, of course, take industry input, but test it, sandbox it enough, even if it takes 3 years, no problem. But, launch it at scale and make it mandatory at scale after it's been proven, to not harm the key stakeholder, which is actually still the student.
Absolutely. I think a lot of common themes there. No one size fits all. Apply based on activity need. Apply based on technology. Account for tech changes and sandboxes. Do we also have time for questions? We can take a few questions from the audience. So yes, would anyone have any questions for the
Yeah.
Please go ahead. If you could also introduce yourself, that would be great.
I can take that perhaps. See, UPI is working fine even in rural India, more or less. Now, by the way, I contend that a lot of parts of Delhi and Bombay are behaving like rural India when it comes to telecom connectivity, some parts of this building included, right? And so I think those challenges are real, not much can, but hopefully telecom infrastructure will improve, QoS will improve, and frameworks will come. But by and large, digital verification, validations, etc., are working okay. One thing that is comforting is that most of the education use cases are not time critical. Like, you're not waiting for a transaction to happen then and there. There is enough. I would say at least most of the use cases are not particularly time sensitive, and so maybe that helps. But yes, having said that, that will still not be a reason enough to not do it. Like, I think it needs to be done. It needs to have, it's like our FASTag. While the government said no car can pass the toll without the FASTag, but today cars still pass the toll without FASTag, without paying the 2x the fee. So, the implementation will provide for, enough bypass channels or bypass lanes. But the bypass lanes, you have to keep erecting more and more friction and barriers in those bypass lanes so that ultimately cars pay the toll and go through the FASTag lane, right? So that's what I think realistically, that's what will happen.
I'm from education industry. I've been various universities with colleges and universities in India and USA for the last 40 years. Some of the issues that you're dealing with is called a FIRPALA, which actually deals with privacy. So how to protect the confidentiality, the grades, various other matters. So, and when you look at the case, I have studied law in university, engineer, but I have extensive experience in law as well. I have seen literally thousands of case laws there that deal with the very issues that you are struggling with about 30 years ago. Another thing is, after I returned to India, I have served as again I'm dealing with data. Students that are evolving, they are developing, and they make mistakes. So how do you hold them accountable? I talked about behavioral data. So that affects their future, as we just mentioned in our from the previous panel. So these aspects can be, I feel, if you at the time of enrollment, because you are talking at tech, not this duplicate motor system where parents come in and then we have interaction with them, who we are, and when there are issues, they come in, or there are ways of verifying that. Verifiable consent, parental consent, can be done maybe at the time of enrollment itself. But take the undertaking from them at the time of enrollment that this is my contact point, and as soon as the contact changes, I'm going to get back in touch with you, and I will change my contact. So that is where you can verify. Aadhaar is there, but see, there is in terms of data also, there is a lot of competition between firms. I see this in education industry also. When we send for training, placements, so this data becomes key. So the internal people become very protective of that because there are external stakeholders. So definitely, I feel there are possibilities, but you may want to look into. Here is a legal profession. You can look up the US case law. They have dealt with this another action. The reason why I want to ask, you might want to also come into situations where the parental informed consent might become difficult. So in which case, what you do? There might be exceptions. For example, parents are going to divorce, separation, or they might be less immature, and they might be less mature than student themselves. So there are situations where you can come across this scenario. These are exceptional situations. These also need to be worked out.
Yeah, definitely. I think verifiable parental consent is also very much a theme in the in US, and but I think they might be falling short of saying establish also the parent-child relationship.
Yes.
That's the tricky piece there. I'm wondering maybe one more question we could take before we close the session. There was a hand up there somewhere. Yeah, please.
Hi, ma'am. My name is Amit. I'm from Adda 247. It's an EdTech company. I wanted to ask that US and Europe, they have like student data protection law. Like Europe has general data protection, and I think US has FIRPA. Like, do you see when does a particular specifically student data protection law coming to India, or are the industry leaders in touch with government? Do they have a certain policy regarding it? Anything?
Would anyone like to? I think the journey is starting with.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there are many many aspects of, I mean, a lot of what we were discussing today or right now also, right? There are many aspects of actual student data that are part of the DPDP Act. So yeah, I would say that in some sense, the journey started, right? Like even if you look at the DPDP law, there are many aspects around students specifically, children specifically, where we talked about verifiable consent is needed before you can process their data. There is also there's a specific rule in there which essentially says that you cannot behaviorally monitor, even if consent or no consent for children under a certain age, you cannot behaviorally monitor that. So I think many aspects of that are part of the DPDP Act.
Yeah, and I think this kind of sets the baseline, and then it'll leave it up to sectoral regulators, sectoral, different kinds of authorities to build on it, like RBI for fintech, health, and other sectors. I am mindful of the time, so I think we could close the session. Thank you all so much for your time today. This was a great session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful to have you all here. Maybe have a group picture, please. So we are not breaking. We are going ahead with the next session, which is the last session for the day.